Of the show. This is what we call Z Talk. Today we're talking economy, and who better to do that than economist and managing partner of Ishmael Yamson and associate Micheal Harry Yamson. He's here with us. We're most privileged to have him here. Good morning, sir.
Good morning to you.
Finally, it's a privilege to see you.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. We've spoken over the phone a couple of times.
Yes.
But finally, you're seated in our studios. I hope the weekend was restful.
Not so restful for me. I have too many burials in my family.
Yes, but Ssnit'S this morning, over from Friday, Saturday, Sunday, this morning, Ssnit'S is still trending. Your general thoughts on this whole Ssnit'S discussion? How did we get here, and should we have gotten here?
Well, good morning, Jerry. And for those listening to us, good morning. It looks like these days in our country, it's always very heavy. Well, some will say we got here because Ssnit'S took a decision to offload its interests in a certain number of hotels. And that decision met with a great deal of opposition. As the story has evolved, you've heard stories about the businesses not being, viable, competition being so great,
Airbnb
coming in, and there's only one word for everything that we've heard, and it is excuses.
Okay.
Excuses because you don't get here out of nothing. You get here because of decisions not made. You get here because of decisions made. And the sum total of it is the strikes we are seeing today. And my view when we spoke last week was that Ssnit'S itself has not taken a great deal of quality interest in the holdings.
Okay.
So when you say the management has failed, you've failed to invest in the right kind of management. Right?
Okay.
If you say the asset is not delivering, you fail to invest in the quality of your asset. Because not every hotel in this country is collapsing. How does it happen that your portfolio of, 4 hotels, are all going down except for one, and even the one that is staying up, you don't have much confidence in its future? So there's a failure on the part of Ssnit'S to invest in the people, to invest in the asset, to actually understand where the future is going. Because Airbnb did not appear in Ghana today. There is a whole government agency under the tourism ministry that tracks what is happening in Airbnb. So the information is not unavailable. It is available.
Okay. So
if you were interested, you'd have known where Airbnb was going and what Airbnb was doing to push its growth. And you being the owner of a hotel could have made a decision. What do I do to counter this trend?
Exactly.
But Ssnit'S didn't do that. And now we're here. But the issue also still remains that, so what is the future? Is the future to divest its direct interest in hotels? And if it is about hotels, is it really to say that it is only hotels or any direct involvement in any business, so that Ssnit'S just becomes an investor in other people's businesses?
Okay.
That is not clear.
Yeah, but that would be a very tough call.
Well, I've read an article about the CEO saying that Ssnit'S as an entity will now only make investments in fixed return instruments.
What happens to the Ssnit'S hospital in my area?
Well, that's why I asked the question. Is it about hotels per se, or is it about direct investment or involvement in the operation of businesses of any sort? So there has to be a better engagement, particularly of the direct stakeholders, which has not happened. Part of the reason for the strikes we are seeing today is because Ssnit'S has not engaged its stakeholders adequately or effectively. And so there are lots of questions, very few answers, And those answers that are available are inadequate. Now we're at risk of the situation becoming a personalized matter. What has the board chair done? What has the CEO done? What have reps from in labor on the board done? And we're losing sight of the more important question. How do we keep the pensions pot funded adequately?
Okay.
Today, we have more young people than older people.
Okay.
And Ssnit'S is already under stress. So what happens when people like me and the people 10 years younger than me also now start to retire, because the numbers then get bigger and bigger?
It's true.
The youth dividend of today is the pensions nightmare of tomorrow.
You have to repeat that statement.
You're making me sound like a pastor. I'm saying that the youth dividend of today is the pensions nightmare of tomorrow. So at any point in time, we have to have a 20, 25, 30-year view of how we're going to fund pensions and what we are going to do to fund pensions in this country.
Okay.
I don't believe that Ssnit'S began the conversation with that on the table. And it feels like a very short-term analysis of what's going on in the last 2-3 years. And we're making a decision that has implications for the next 30 years.
Exactly.
If Rock City wants to build a mega stake in the hotel industry in Ghana, that tells me that Airbnb notwithstanding,
it's still a profitable.
The sector is not going down. You cannot have tourism without hotels.
Exactly.
So if tourism is growing, and it was one of the fastest sectors in terms of the sectors to experience the fastest recovery after COVID. So if the sector is growing and hotels are integral to the sector, then it's very difficult for someone to convince me, for example, that a stake in 4 prime hotels is a bad business investment.
Yeah. I mean,
the mother sector is growing in leaps and bounds. It is projected to grow in leaps and bounds. Ghana can expect 10 million visitors in the not too distant future. Where will they stay? I don't think that with our 2-3 million private homes, we can accommodate all 10 million guests. We will still need hotels.
Exactly.
So what kind of hotels will we need going forward? That's the question.
That's where the question should be.
So what do you have today, and how do you orient it to face the future? That's the question Ssnit'S ought to be asking. That's the demand that organized labor should be putting on Ssnit'S. But that's not the conversation we are having. And it's unfortunately becoming a politicized conversation. And this is not about politics. This is about cold cedis, cold dollars.
Wow.
So I think Ssnit'S has horribly lost its way.
UTAG is calling for a dissolution of the board and management.
Well, that's their opinion. I will simply say that they need to find their way. They need to find reason for everybody to have confidence in the leadership. And they need to inspire us that they actually have a big vision for the pensions pot. Because this discussion, as I keep saying, it's not political. Tell me that Ghana will have enough money to double the pensions payout 10 years from now. Tell me that Ghana will have enough money to keep pensioners ahead of the inflation curve 10 years from now. That is a promise worth making. That is leadership that we will all have confidence in and support. But right now, I think we are stuck in the little things. We are stuck in the unimportant matters, because the leadership itself at Ssnit'S is not understanding the direction that it needs to take, and is not convincing anyone about the decisions that it is making so far.
Yeah, but there was this study that said that Ssnit'S itself was at risk and that it wouldn't last beyond a certain number of years. And they came out and said, no, it's not true.
I saw that. But my point is, it's not true for what reason? You understand? If you say it's not
They
true,
said it was not true because they don't pay pensions via investments or something, and that rather it was by the contributions. And so long as contributions are going on, the Ssnit'S would always be there.
so it's a Ponzi scheme. All Ponzi schemes collapse in the end. If you don't actually have investments that bring in more than you are taking in, it will collapse. That's why I said when the larger numbers start coming
as more
in,
numbers enter the pensions.
what happens is that, like we've seen in many other countries, you get to a point where the bulge becomes the middle bulge becomes the top. And then the narrow bottom comes into the middle. And then suddenly, without investments that are yielding great revenue for you, it is then a Ponzi scheme. So we have to be very careful about some of these statements that are made.
What are the potential long-term consequences for the economy, so that we dovetail in the economic conversation with this Ssnit'S thing? How does this labor here calling for this? This is 10 a.m. today. There's going to be a huge labor meeting with, Ghana Medical Association, NATS is joining. What are the long-term consequences of this whole discussion on economy?
The issue for me, as far as the economy is concerned, is we need to understand how we want to generate and sustain growth in our economy. And underpinning that is the question of where will jobs come from? Because it is economic growth, jobs growth, that ultimately you need to fuel an organization or a fund like Ssnit'S. We have all witnessed a remarkable shrinkage in the size of our economy in real terms. I always smile when I see people report CD numbers and say, oh, there's growth in trade. And once you dollarize the value, you see that everything went down. Nothing went up. So we need to think very hard about where do we grow this economy from? How do we grow it in a way that is sustainable over the next 30, 40, 50 years? We've sat with colleagues from other regions in the world, and they will tell you, we don't do 4-year growth plans. 4 years is just implementation. The growth is 30, 40, 50 year. So, sometimes when we say, oh, China became big, China didn't become big. China was going to become big because they had a plan. The thing is that, where is our plan as a country? And when I always talk about growth, the sad part is that every long-term development plan in this country has become a political football. So we do the plan, the next government comes, kicks it out, writes its own. So we are constantly writing 20, 30, 40-year development plans, and they only last 4 years.
Or at most 8 years.
At most 8 years, and then we rewrite them. So on this, I lay the responsibility on our constitution. I lay the responsibility on our president. I lay the responsibility on our parliament. Those who manage these three things need to serve us better. We need to change the very constitution of this country and find a way to ensure that when it asks for development plans, it protects those development plans. Right now, no development plan is protected. I remember one plan was presented to the incoming NPP government, and then it was booted out. And then nothing happened until this year when another plan was presented. As we are about to enter into election, the question is, will the next president, whoever he is, will he adopt the work of another administration?
Who presents these plans? Whose job? Whose responsibility?
NDPC.
The National Development Planning Commission.
Exactly. So, look, the Constitution has asked for something and it doesn't protect that something. Every president in this country has been guilty of taking their predecessor's development plan and shoving it into the bin, doing nothing with it and writing their own. And every parliament in this country, after resourcing the NDPC to do great work, has failed to protect the work of the NDPC. Look, we are not serious about growth. We talk about it, we hope for it, but we don't actually do much with it. The growth that tends to happen happens in spite of, not because of. And we have to be very careful because we cannot keep living on the wind. Eventually, we have to have a national consensus about what is growth, where will growth come from, how will we protect it, how will we deepen it, and how will we make it serve the people of this country. If our young people are not brought into this economy in a meaningful way, we are sitting on a time bomb. We've seen Kenya. It's frustration that led to Kenya. Our young people are no less frustrated, but I think they are a bit cleverer about how to navigate the future. But we can't take it for granted. We cannot take it for granted. If we are generating fewer jobs than children coming out of university, coming out of senior secondary school, coming out of our institutes and training colleges, we have a problem. And that is not a political matter. It is a national issue. It requires consensus. It requires deliberate, thorough, deep thinking. We're not seeing that. And I think we love our adversarial politics a little bit too much. So growth is a big issue for us. And not just that. The other question is that Ghana is trying to integrate itself very deeply into the African economy.
Yeah.
We have seen 2 years running that Ghana actually made very good progress in its trade with Africa. Real progress. But 3 years into AFCFTA, we've not had that conversation here about what part of the African trade opportunity, about the African growth opportunity Ghana wants to be a part of. If I take Nigeria, we can all immediately say banks, insurance, i.e. financial services. Nigeria made its decision. So what's Ghana's decision? South Africa made its decision because it was highly industrialized, had a deep technology industry, and so they have built their trade around industry and technology. What are going to be the poles around which Ghana builds its trade with Africa? And makes, well, you say, I would agree, but I would say not just agree, but agribusiness.
Okay.
But we have to make a decision. Where do we want to go with Africa? So I talk about growth, and that's very broad.
Yeah.
But the other area for me is Africa, and we have to make that decision, that very, very conscious decision about, first of all, where in Africa do we want to build our trade, in what sectors, in what scale, to which part of the market, the low end, the middle end, the upper end. We have to make these decisions about what it is that we want to do when it comes to the Africa opportunity. The third area for me really has to do with our own view of how we want to fund both our trade and our growth. We have had an economy that for so long, sometimes for political reasons, sometimes simply for expediency, has been so heavily centered around government. Every government comes into power promising to create jobs. And my firm belief is that government should not be in the business of creating jobs because they never last. Our civil service is bloated. Not just bloated, it is extremely bloated. We need a smaller government. We need a bigger private sector.
Okay.
We understand this, but we don't do it. And every government finds an excuse why it has to be the savior of the economy by getting into business, by getting into the business of being the one to create jobs, rather than the one to stimulate jobs growth. And there's a difference.
Okay.
So our governments have not been in the business of stimulating jobs growth in the private sector. They've all been in the business of creating fictitious jobs that ultimately they are not able to pay for. So we need to do a better job of shifting from promising and creating this expectation that government shall create the jobs to government will stimulate jobs growth, and then making sure that private businesses, small businesses, and particularly small businesses are doing well enough to employ 1, 2, 3 additional people. If you have 3 million private businesses in this country, what happens if each one of them creates one long-term job? Just one long-term job that is properly registered with Ssnit'S and pays tax?
3 million.
3 million. Do you have an unemployment problem?
Really solved.
Solved. So if you don't think about how do I get 3 million businesses to create one meaningful job, one real long-term formalized job, you will have an unemployment problem. You will have a weak Ssnit'S because you have, look, if you take 100 working Ghanaians, only 20 of them have a stable, formalized job that allows them to pay tax and pay Ssnit'S and have the promise of a future. 8 out of 10 have an informal job with no security. When you drive on the road, every vulcanizer you see has an insecure pension, has an insecure future. The day his waist gives up, he has no pension. You and I do, because we wear a shirt and a pair of trousers and sit in an office. But who said they should not have a pension? They ought to. We haven't solved that issue of how to get them to be on the pension. We haven't solved that problem of making sure that the 16, 18-year-old boy who works with him is also formalized. It's tough, but that's the problem we have to solve without the politics. We instinctively say, oh, they are too poor to pay tax. And we forget that by that very statement, we have said they are also too poor to contribute to their Ssnit'S. Then they become aged and poor, and the burden.
The state has
the burden. So we need to solve these problems ahead of time. We have to solve them meaningfully. We have to solve them conclusively. So this matter of where do we stimulate growth, and how do we stimulate growth and trade, and therefore make sure that jobs growth is sustainable, is a big conversation that we need to have.
But in a country where manifestos trump NDPC plans, when are we ever going to have this discussion?
The problem is not manifestos trump NDPC. Manifestos take their cue, or should take their cue from the long-term plan. And that's why I said that protecting that baby called Ghana's long-term development plans is something that between a president, a parliament, and a constitution, we need to make sure is secure. So the problem is not manifestos. Political parties will always write manifestos. Sometimes they only write it to get the votes, and then afterwards they throw it into the bin. So the issue is not the manifesto. The issue is the national document.
Okay.
Right? Which we must make meaningful. Our constitution is meaningless if we are poor.
Okay.
We might as well throw it away. So, for the sake of the very constitution that we all hope will sustain us, we need to make sure that its conception of how we create growth and meaningful lifestyles and livelihoods ought to be similarly protected.
So that it is protected in there.
Yes.
So that if you came to me and said, this is my party's manifesto, I'm going to look at the national plan and say, where does it sit in the plan?
how do I give meaning to the national plan?
Okay.
The next party can have its own perception of how it will give meaning to the national plan. But that's not a problem. The base of both approaches would be a common national plan. When Dan Latte talked about domestication, we all laughed. We all laughed. But the man had a point. And we are here today. For lack of domestication, we perish.
Now you are sounding like a man of God. But that for me is worrying. That you're saying the plants are there, but they are not protected. So everybody comes in and then they pick their very own, and then they say, let's run with it. And you see, this sits in a very interesting conversation we've been having over the past few days on who brought free SHS. Because the word progressively free, or that phrase, has now become, the topic for discussion. What does it mean? But what you're saying is, if we had a plan which is protected by the Constitution, we wouldn't go fighting over the definition. It would be clearly there.
The debate is completely immaterial. What do you care? What does a little child care? Who said what? What matters is what's going on in the classroom. We don't have enough teachers. We have a curriculum that does not make us competitive. We have teachers who are stressed, underpaid. So what's the debate? In the end, if all the children went to school, we would come out with people who are not competitive in the global economy. That is the truth. We haven't defined for ourselves what place we want to have in the global economy.
Which will then determine the quality of human resource we produce.
Thank you. We haven't done that work.
It doesn't matter if everybody goes to school.
It doesn't matter if we all go to school. If we haven't defined where we want to be in the global economy, what role we want to play, how we want to be competitive, what are we going to school for? So the curriculum doesn't do anything for us. The teachers are not even able to teach it because it's too many children sitting on them. They themselves don't get the training. They don't have the equipment. And all we do is have political fights. The real matter hasn't been resolved. So I'm happy if everybody is in a classroom. But let's teach them what they need for their future.
What are we producing? The quality of the human resource. I mean, I've spoken to someone in African human capacity development. I've spoken to people in the area of tourism. Last Friday, I had a good discussion in the studio on agribusiness and technology. One word that came through all of these things is we are not intentional enough as a nation about what we want. Do you see that also applying in the area of economics and growth and job creation? We're not intentional.
Look, in May, we had the Yamson Associates Business Roundtable. Okay. And one of the topics we covered was the role of education. With the right deployment of technology, we stand over the next 50 years to gain an additional $21 trillion worth of GDP.
The right deployment of technology.
21 trillion. AFCFTA says we can gain $450 billion in GDP growth every single year for the next 50 years. However, without the right deployment of technology, you are going to lose 21 billion of growth over the next 50 years. That comes to 450 billion a year. So you have the potential to grow 450 and the potential to lose 420. $30 billion of growth is nothing in a continent like Africa. How much would Ghana's share be of that 30 billion?
Wow.
So you have to decide where you want your growth to come from. And you have to sustain it with the right technologies. And this is just in the area of education. Because the classroom has not modernized, we may lose quality income earning capacity equal to 420 billion a year in our continent. Ghana is part of that. So if you don't give the people the right type of education, the right resources in education, you stand to lose almost all the gains that AFCFTA, for example, promises. Is that the economy we want? And even if all of Africa will get it wrong, should the Black Star of Africa also get it wrong? Or should we get it right because we are the Black Star of Africa?
But the truth is that not all of Africa will get it wrong. There are sharp countries that will get it right, and that means they overtake us.
The more reason why we need to get it right. So you see, you started with Ssnit'S, and we talked about growth, and we talked about trade, and we talked about investing, and we talked about our long-term planning. We're back to the same point. Do we know where we want to be? And are we ready to do the work to help us to chart the path? Whether it is Ssnit'S or government or NDPC or you and me sitting in our individual businesses, what's the plan?
Where would you recommend we be?
For me, I think that in terms of where we want to be, we need to look within. There is absolutely no economy that has made it big in the world without first looking inward. We will say China is an export country, but China just didn't become an export country. China developed internal capacities and capabilities to allow it to become an export country. We talk about South Korea, we talk about Japan, we talk about Singapore, we talk about Rwanda. Even look at Botswana. Botswana has decided what it wants to do. They have cattle, they have diamonds, and they manage those two resources well enough to have a currency stronger than the dollar. Cattle and diamonds.
You know what scares me about this conversation?
What?
I had an engagement with some Zimbabweans, I think a year or two ago. They had come into Ghana, and in engaging me, I'm like, what are you doing here? And they said, listen, we have a plan, and we want to leverage on those plans. We want to be the center for addition of value to agri products and then export it to the rest of Africa. I'm like, what do you mean? Then they began to show me conflicts that were even a bit better than what we are used to, showing me biscuits, then drinks, and Zimbabwe.
Yeah, Zimbabwe. Because remember, Zimbabwe used to be a bread basket for the Southern Africa, at the very least. Before the land reforms and
Mugabe's issues.
Exactly. Zimbabwe was a bread basket. Zimbabwe was a major food producer, a major value adder, addition source for agricultural produce in the Southern Africa region. So the Zimbabweans know a thing or two. But the difference also is that they are very much into commercial farming. And you see, in Ghana, when you say commercial farming, people think, you want to kill the small farmer. That's not the issue. Every small farm needs to behave like a small business. We encourage our small farmer to think like a subsistence farmer.
Okay.
And that is the base from which the inefficiency emerges. That is the reason why their yields are low. Because they are not thinking about productivity. They are not thinking about profitability. They are thinking about volume. But volume alone does not solve the problem. At what cost did you produce that volume? And at what price will you release that volume? So we, for years, have glorified the main season. And the main season, prices drop. But in the main season, waste jumps to 40%.
For lack of storage.
For lack of for lack of a value chain.
Yeah, exactly.
So in the main season, in fact, our losses are compounded. It's not a beautiful time. It's a sad time. Every time I hear main season, I'm sad. And yet, from the policymakers to the government, state agencies, the departments, the agencies, it's almost as if the main season has come. We're going to see lower food inflation, and when you look at our inflation trends, it's coming down, and then shoots up, and it's like we are the mercy of the weather.
So we work on tomatoes through Gbogboloshi for one season, and then after a few months, tomatoes are so expensive that everybody's complaining.
Because we haven't done that simple job of saying that let's add value to agriculture. Intentionally. We shouldn't be in a situation where we look at the main seasons or the glut periods just because prices will crash. These lower prices should be feeding into industry. They should be converting into products with longer shelf life, products with export potential. That's what we should be talking about. So if you don't build, and that's why I said, what kind of growth do we want? So if you're not thinking about where you want to build capacity, look inward to build the capacity, you will find that we will be running on a fixed point. That is part of how I see things. We need to look inward, think about the capabilities and the capacities that we must build. The other thing is that I think we cannot run away from technology. I go back to technology. We need to aggressively digitize this economy. Fundamental to digitizing this economy is payment systems. And I think that the cardinal sin in all of this is the e-levy. I think it's an immoral tax. It's just wrong. It's a twisted mentality to say we both buy water to save a dying person, and my guy will die because I cannot pay the additional tax, just because I want to pay with a card or an electronic solution. It's a sick tax. It needs to go. It doesn't do anything for us. It only long-term regresses us. We're just taking more out of private pockets that would actually be deployed in more efficient decisions. Government is the most wasteful part of our economy. I hardly see the need to resource it with more tax until it gets its act together. But the e-levy is a disaster. It's no matter what anyone says, it is a disaster. It's a wrong tax. It needs to go. But let me go back to the main point. We must digitize. We must bring all of us into the digital age. We must use technology in everything that we do. It is the way forward. It is how other economies, other countries have leapfrogged, and we cannot abandon technology. I know that in our history, in our context, we are suspicious of technology.
Okay.
But technology is no devil. It is just how it is used. And, when I always think of the e-levy, I say it is a prime example why people will never trust technology, because we use it more to exploit than to do good and to be moral. We are not using that capacity in a moral way. It is a completely immoral tax. And I think that the other thing we need to think about is, how do we incentivize made in Ghana? I get very frustrated when I hear government people, political people talk about, let's take taxes off imports and let's reduce charges at the port for imported finished products and all kinds of things. And I say to myself, how do we industrialize and then make imports cheaper? The two don't go together. You have to make a choice. All strategy is choice.
Okay.
So you cannot pursue a strategic decision to industrialize in whatever fashion your domestic economy and then make the competing imports cheaper. It doesn't work for me. So we need to make it clear that the incentives will go to made in Ghana. We are the sovereign. Why should I have toll without crude, but the BDC can bring finished product? Why is it that all BDCs should not first import crude so toll will work? Because toll was designed to work on a tolling basis anyway.
Okay.
So everybody bring your crude. Once you finish making your crude, after all, toll can now only supply about 20% of what we need. So you bring enough crude for 20% of what you plan to sell and let the rest come as finished, because that's the capacity we have. But at least 20% of our consumption would be put through toll. You have a viable organization that can then think about expanding
and
so that
more jobs.
So to go from 20 to 21 to 25 to 30 to 40, and a day and a time will come when from 20 you build back up. But it's almost as if we deliberately, government after government, hobble toll and then turn around to the people and say, oh, but you have a debt, go and pay it. We kill it, and then we say, you go and put your money in the dead horse. So there's something fundamentally wrong. Why is it that someone can get up and say, I want to import rice, and there's no obligation on that person to first of all buy and sell made in grown in Ghana rice? And we say it's a free economy. Yes, it is free, but I don't know any economy that is free. You can't go to America and start practicing free by importing everything. They'll tell you that there are some things that you need to,
made in the U.S.
Yeah. And sometimes they will actually say, their famous chant, USA.
Yeah.
So they will force you. Toyota was losing the battle in the U.S. until they built plants in the U.S. So call it free, but it's not that free.
Is it not because those countries
so
have the capacity?
I have another pastoral quote for you.
Please.
To play, you must plug in. If you don't plug into the domestic Ghanaian economy, we won't let you play.
Is it not because, and it still goes back to the same thing, those who are benefiting are those who are making the decision. So why would he make a decision where he might not benefit?
Transparency. We lack transparency in the decision-making processes. And there is no desire to bring transparency to our decision-making processes. So you sit in Ghana, you wake up one morning, and parliamentarians have decided that they will drive without speed limit.
Yeah.
Huh?
Sirens on.
Sirens on. What is the emergency?
They go to parliament to pass.
Is that an emergency? Going to parliament has become an emergency. Plan your day and go to work. You say, I want siren. I want to drive. So if that person drives at 100 in a 20 zone and kills your child, he's broken no law because he is not bound by any speed limit. He's not reckless. He's not careless. Killed your child for free because he's a member of parliament. He's a minister. And I bet you the minute they get it, many other people in the government sector will find a way to also take it. Is that how we want to run our country? If
there's a sticker that shows that you are, I get a sticker, put it there, I do 120.
Home free. Drive. Kill. Move on. The more important point is transparency. Sunlight cures all things. We don't have transparency. And because we don't have transparency, look, I had a major issue when we went into DDEP because I kept asking the question. The minister went to parliament and less than 2 months later, we declared the domestic debt. What did parliament see that prevented them from knowing that we were broke? Or what did parliament see and decide not to comment on when they knew we were broke. The issue is transparency. And yet, these same processes and these same people who kept from us such disastrous information and prevented us as a country from acting, 6 months from now, they will tell us they want their ex gratia. They want it paid. After collapsing all of us with opaque economic decision making that has brought us to our knees, they will all troop together, just like the speed limit cancellation. Quietly, no argument. That day, you will not see any fighting in Parliament. They will all do it quietly. Mr. President will bring his bill. The judges will bring their bill. They also take ex gratia. They all come and take it quietly. No argument. No court case. The lack of transparency is as inimical to growth as anything we can imagine. And it serves only those people for whom the status quo benefits. Yeah. The youth will lose out. The old will lose out. The entrepreneur will lose out. The worker will lose out. Every Ghanaian loses out when decisions are made in the dark.
Looking well to build capacity, aggressively digitize the economy, especially payment systems, incentivize made in Ghana.
Yeah. You want one more? I'll tell you. Debt.
Okay.
Debt. We've built too much debt and we are still building debt. Every week, it's like a hurrah. The short-term treasury bills were oversubscribed.
Yeah.
And government will be asking for more the next week. It is the only source of money now for government. Banks are begging government to take their money. And absolutely nobody is asking the question, how will we pay this mountain of debt?
When are we going to start paying?
Don't be surprised, and I'm not being alarmist, but eventually, like happened with the bonds, irresponsible borrowing will lead to a default.
And a haircut.
They say it can never happen because it will be disastrous. But what will you do when you cannot pay? You either print money and destroy the economy, or you give a haircut and destroy the people. Either way, there is no joy down the line. There is no joy down the line. Let's not deceive ourselves. Right now, it's a very short-termist approach. Borrow all you can and keep the government afloat. In 6 months, we are gone. Ghana will take care of itself. That is what the government is doing. They don't care.
But they are trying to stay in power.
If
so
they
should care.
But that's not the point. Staying in power, if it ruins you, it's still fine. Remember the mantra, first get power, first keep power. And I'm not speaking here as anything but as an ordinary Ghanaian. If we were borrowing these amounts of money to put into recurrent expenditure, i.e. consumption, not investment, because I promise you, there is no road that is built in 91 days, tolled, and it will begin to deliver profits. There is no major investment that you are going to do with 91-day treasury bills.
Yeah, because 91 days later, I'm coming for my money.
So you are just consuming, and then depending on e-levy to go and pay for it. That's why they like e-levy.
Interesting.
So all this borrowing we are seeing is a bucket of tears waiting for us down the line. Somebody has to call the government out and say, stop the borrowing. Because you have to pay for it. one way or the other, you will either print money or you give haircuts. One way or the other, you will pay for this. And it will not be you, it will be us. So let's not clap, because this is a bomb
waiting to go off in the future.
Today, tomorrow, whenever. Remember DDEP. We said haircut. Eventually, we have to pay. The bilaterals gave us time. The commercial people took some haircut.
Yeah.
But eventually, you have to pay. And you are not paying at 6 cedis or 5 cedis or 4.5 cedis to the dollar. You are paying at 16 cedis to the dollar. So eventually you will pay. You will pay painfully. $3 is now 1 because you don't have the currency. So eventually we will pay. And you may say, oh, it's CD debt, but eventually you will pay. So we are sitting on a bomb. There is no good news. There's a lot of short-term, let's get through the next 6 months kind of thinking going on. And while all this is happening, the bad stories keep coming up of waste, of graft, of corruption, of sweetheart deals. They are all still happening.
You don't see any hope in the next, beyond December 7th?
The actors haven't changed.
Wow.
The actors haven't changed.
So the script is the same?
The script is the same.
Till when?
Till you and I decide enough is enough.
What are we going to do? Kenya?
Oh, no. Ghanaians will never do that, no. But I think that we need to not give a free pass to political people now. We need to ask the questions. Where are you taking us? And policies that don't have a cost to it should no longer be allowed.
Oh, you have to say that again.
You really want me to become a collared person, eh? No, policies without a cost should not be allowed. We saw it with free SHS. As fantastic as it is, it bankrupted us. And now we want to write a law in a very hasty fashion because someone sees it as a legacy. The thing is that the ability to educate our young people till the age of 18, free of the burden of cost, is in our own interest. That's not a matter for debate.
Okay.
The next question then becomes, how do we pay for it? Because it won't be free. Teachers don't work for peanuts. They work for cash.
Yeah.
And the equipment costs money. So how we pay for this? That's the conversation we need to have. I was a young boy when we went into JSS and SSS. And even at that time, I kept asking myself, why didn't we bring more people into the existing schools and build more dormitories? Because they were the centers of excellence. Okay, there was an argument that you need to make it accessible, not just available. So let's build more of these institutions. But to do that, you then needed a competitive curriculum, well-trained teachers, and facilities. And on these three things, we've never achieved. We've never built enough facilities. We've never trained our teachers well. And we have never had a competitive curriculum. So the task ahead of us is to demand for these fundamentals so that Ssnit doesn't come back to us and say that, oh, my hotels are failing. They don't make money. So let me sell them. Your money bought it. Your money built it. I'm going to sell it. And when you ask, he says, oh, the market is tough. Well, the market is tough in Aboblushi, but you don't see the market women packing up and going home. They make better investment decisions than Ssnit'S.
The women at Aboblushi.
I tell you.
Malamata.
They are smarter.
Tuesday market.
They are smarter. So the Bible says, learn from the ant. Maybe Ssnit'S should learn from those women.
Go to the ant, thou sluggard.
And don't get me started.
Oh my goodness. Micheal Harry Yamson. He is an economist and also the managing partner of Yamson and Associates. Z-Talk has gone beyond its time. I know. I'm being warned. I know. I deliberately went beyond my time because the conversation was a good one. I mean, it's so enlightening. But the final thing, we went and came back to Ssnit'S, but looking what to build capacity, aggressively digitize this economy, especially our payment systems, incentivize made in Ghana, look for a way of, handling this debt. These 4 factors, anyone listening to us should be able to look at it and say, let's call this man and talk to him. And let's see how we go forward with this. If they call, would you pick?
Why not?
Okay.
I'm a Ghanaian.
That's a good one. Any final words before we take leave of you?
Get rid of the e-levy. It's a useless tax.
Get rid of e-levy. It's a useless task. It's an immoral task. So says the man himself. It's been Z-Talk. And I know we're in the final hour. We're talking to the man who climbed the tallest mountain. He scaled the tallest mountains.
He's my classmate, you know.
Okay. So he's also here. It's going to be an interesting conversation right here on Z in the